Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger of the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our webcast with our founder and president, Helga Zepp LaRouche. Today is June 14th, 2019, and we just came from a very extraordinary event last Saturday on June 8th, a memorial to Lyndon H. LaRouche Jr. The title of the memorial was In Memoriam, The Triumph of Lyndon H. LaRouche Jr. And Helga, it was an extremely moving, emotional event, which provided people with some real insights, I think, into the extraordinary life of your husband. And I'd like your thoughts on how it went and the importance of this memorial.
Well, I think that everybody who participated in this memorial, either in New York or in some of the live events or live transmitted events in various American cities, people were so absolutely astounded and moved because the real Lyndon LaRouche came across absolutely clearly. The integration of his own words, because we had very important, beautiful video clips of his speeches and integrated with the most profound classical music performances, which were all on an extremely high level and quality. And then naturally, the whole composition really made people absolutely stunned. Many people, as a matter of fact, I have found not one person who was not saying that they were crying at various points of the of the event because it was so incredibly truthful and moving. So my direct appeal to you, who are listening right now, I would really urge you, take the 2.5, 3 hours time and watch this memorial, which you can see on the Schiller website, and really take the time, because you will never get, at least not up to now, never get a better idea who Lyndon LaRouche was and who he is and who he will be in the future of world developments. And this is extremely important because obviously to clear his image, which has been so much vilified by the evil forces who prosecuted him and put him in jail innocently, the clearing of his name is absolutely important, because his ideas are still the most advanced ideas of our time. And I'm saying that not diminishing what other great leaders also in other countries are doing, but I think anybody who engages to study the works of Lynn in depth will admit that he contributed in so many fields, in economics, natural sciences, in the arts, in history, in philosophy. He contributed exceptionally important breakthroughs which still need to be learned by many people around the world in order to solve the problems of this present world strategic situation. So I would really encourage you, go and look at this memorial and help us to clear his name, because there is no bigger difference between the real Lyndon LaRouche and what the same kind of nasty British-inspired mass media are now putting out against Trump, against Putin, against Xi Jinping. It's all coming from the same geopolitical faction of the British Empire and its co-thinkers in the United States and the continent of Europe. So that's my urgent appeal to you.
And people can go to the Schiller Institute website and see it. Now, also extremely important for what you were just saying, the exoneration of Lyndon LaRouche. LaRouche PAC is going to be putting out a documentary shortly called The LaRouche Case, Robert Mueller's First Hit Job. And I think this also will add to the whole mobilization to have an exoneration, which is an urgent question. It's not just a question of bringing honor to Lyndon LaRouche. He doesn't need the honor. He's spoken for himself. He lived an extraordinary life. And what's necessary is that people recognize what you were just saying about his role and internalize that so that we can actually solve the problems that he was addressing during his life. Helga, I don't know if you've been involved in the producing of this documentary, but is there anything you'd like to say about it?
No, But we will release it very shortly, and I would ask all the listeners to help us to spread the news simultaneously in all social media internationally, because this should become what we call in Germany a Paukenschlag, because it will put light on the apparatus which is the war party today. And since this is not an academic question, it is extremely urgent, because we are sitting still, despite the tremendous potentials of the world situation, we are still sitting on a tremendous powder keg.
Well, we have the G20 summit coming up in 2 weeks in Osaka, Japan. There's a potential there because President Trump has said he wishes to meet with President Putin of Russia and President Xi of China. But there's also tremendous threats that are emerging, and President Putin addressed these in several venues recently, including his warning that the relations between Russia and the United States are deteriorating. What can you tell us about what Putin has had to say and what he's been doing?
Well, Putin actually said that the U.S. Russia relationship is deteriorating by the hour. And before the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, he addressed all the major international news services, and there he warned that the danger of a global catastrophe coming out of a deterioration, including into nuclear war, is actually very much alive. And then I thought very interesting, he appealed to the youth. He said the youth these days are so much concerned about environmental issues, but teenagers and children should actually be concerned about the global threat to the existence of civilization. And I think that is a very truthful question, because the last time we were in a real serious crisis, this was at the beginning of the 80s, when you had the medium-range missile crisis. There were hundreds of thousands of people in the street warning of the danger of a third world war. And today we are, really, because all channels, there are still some channels, but it's nowhere even the kind of communication which existed between the NATO and the Warsaw Pact during the time of the Cold War. Then Putin also, in another occasion, warned that the global system, the system of globalization, is in a complete phase of deterioration and obviously not functioning. And he attributed that to the failure of courage and will to fix the reasons why the 2008 crisis erupted in the first place. And he demanded very urgent changes to be taken. I think I would add, to what Putin said, I would add that there is one conception which would really remedy the situation, and one would really hope that the G20 leaders would be wise enough to put this on the agenda and adopt it, which may not happen in this way, but it would be urgent, and that is the idea that the present Western financial system is bankrupt. We are heading towards a new financial storm. All the signs are there. It more likely than not will happen this year if these reforms or changes are not taking place. So therefore, the adequate policy for the G20 meeting would be to put on the agenda a new Bretton Woods system, which, in all likelihood will not be adopted by the G20, because you always have some countries which want to stick to the old paradigm and geopolitical manipulation. And therefore, my husband has called many years ago for a partnership of the four most powerful countries, the United States, Russia, China, and India, who represent, the majority of the world population and who are somehow representative for all these developing countries as well. This is not an exclusive idea. Other countries like Germany, Japan, Korea, and others are welcome to join. But you need a powerful combination of countries to impose a new credit system. We have to go away from monetarism. It was the neoliberal monetarist system which has aggravated all of these problems we have internationally today. and we need a new Bretton Woods system in the tradition of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and not the kind of Bretton Woods system as it was really implemented in the post-war period, because it lacked emphatically mechanisms to have a technology transfer to the developing sector. And Lynn has been very emphatic that the new Bretton Woods system must provide for a large-scale credit generation for the development of the developing countries. But I would urge all our viewers, if you want to do anything for world peace and overcoming these kinds of challenges which we see right now in Iran or around the Iran issue and other issues we should talk about, then help us to get the kind of mobilization going on the new Bretton Woods, and the idea that we have to get the United States to cooperate with the new paradigm which is emerging clearly on the planet with the Belt and Road Initiative, which is now already joined by 126 countries. And if you look at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, that was also a very important element of the emerging new world order, because Russia, far from being isolated, you had 1,900 participants, you had 650 major trade agreements being made, and I think 350 top leaders were there. So it was really an absolute important meeting, and obviously Xi Jinping and Putin agreed on a comprehensive strategic partnership for a new era. That idea was then continued to discuss and is actually discussed today at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. And there will be meetings between Putin, Putin, Xi Jinping and Modi. And so the stage is really prepared that at the G20, hopefully these summits between Trump and Putin and Trump and Xi Jinping and maybe also Modi, that they will actually take place and really put the new paradigm on the agenda, which is so urgently needed.
I think it's important to note that while all this diplomatic activity and discussion is underway, a Putin-Xi meeting, Abe, I think, was recently in Moscow, the Japanese prime minister, all these other meetings are taking place discussing specifically how to build a new productive system. We have nothing but foolish gibberish coming out of the United States and Western Europe. We can get to that in a moment, but there was also a very important statement issued by Sergei Lavrov regarding U.S. Russian relations. I think that's worth putting on the table also.
Yes, this was also in the same light of warning that the danger of thermonuclear war is not yet eliminated by no means. And therefore, Lavrov basically urged that the United States and Russia should put out a joint declaration that the use of thermonuclear weapons is unacceptable. And he referred to the fact that such an agreement existed between the Soviet Union and the United States, and that therefore there is no reason why that should not be signed and stated. But then he also noted that concerning all the different proposals concerning arms treaties and similar proposals, there has been not yet any positive response from the United States. So I think this is also a matter of grave concern and something which we should change.
Now, talking about the United States, we see a very strange pattern which has continued of Donald Trump saying one thing. For example, in his meeting with the Polish president a couple of days ago, he interrupted the Polish president who was talking about the dangers of Russia. And Trump said, no, look, we should have a great relationship with Russia, a great relationship with China. And then yet he turns around and has people like Pompeo and Bolton threatening countries, talking about the rebellion in Hong Kong, that this is important, and that Trump came out in support of the demonstrations against the government there. You also had Pompeo issuing a so-called government assessment that said Iran was responsible for an attack on 2 ships in the Gulf of Oman, which now puts us again on the verge of an potential war there in the Persian Gulf. And it's interesting, Helga, again, this occurs what? Right after President Abe of Japan was in Tehran as a mediator, in a sense, between the U.S. and Iran, and also before the Osaka summit. So where do you see us heading in these things, with these crises?
I think that various leaders, especially China and Russian leaders, they say it repeatedly, and also their publications, that they very clearly differentiate between President Trump and the other members of his cabinet. The only problem is, that when Trump says something positive, and then the next moment his cabinet members do the opposite, it makes it for foreign leaders in China, Russia, but also in Europe, in Germany, in France, very difficult to have confidence that the word of Trump really will prevail. And that is a serious strategic problem because, I think Trump has said very positive things concerning China, but then Pompeo, in his capacity of Secretary of State, actually a month ago, met with so-called democracy groups from Hong Kong, and in a certain sense, meddling in the internal affairs of China, which naturally adds to the extremely high tensions which exist because of the trade war between the US and China. And also concerning the situation in Iran, this is very dangerous. This could lead to a new war with Iran, and we in the past always noted that this immediately means a confrontation with Russia and China, which could go totally out of control, and you could have World War III. So this time, just hours after Abe, Prime Minister Abe from Japan was in Tehran to mediate or attempt to mediate, which was supported by President Trump, you had this attack on these 2 tankers in the Gulf of Oman, and within hours, without obviously the ability to prove it, Pompeo accused Iran of being behind it, putting out a so-called government assessment. Now, within hours, you can't find out what really happened, and the American strategic analyst Pat Lang asked the question that he really would like to know how many of the other intelligence services in the United States share that assessment. So obviously this is a very dangerous situation because, once you have anything more developing in this region, this could really threaten world peace in the most immediate way. So I think it's a problem. I don't know how difficult it is for President Trump to solve, but I don't think it's very good for the future of international relations if these different voices come from the United States on almost every topic. Trump is attempting something positive, like in the case of North Korea, then it's being sabotaged because in the last moment in the Hanoi summit, demands were injected which ruined it. The same happened with the U.S.-China trade war, tariff confrontation. Both sides said they were very optimistic they could find a solution, and then all of a sudden demands were put in the negotiations which really demanded that China should absolutely abandon its very successful economic model. And that was naturally unacceptable because why should China change a model which had the most unbelievable success in the last 40 years and which is now a hope and inspiration for many other countries in the world to do likewise and overcome underdevelopment and poverty. So the Ministry of Commerce, in the meantime, in China put out a white paper where they point by point refute the arguments made why this trade deficit exists. And one of the most important points actually is, that the trade balance exists because the export of China to the United States is largely low technology goods, and that if the United States would put the same rules on the trade with China, like, for example, they have with France, which basically means that 1,300 items of mostly high technology exports from the United States to China would be possible, the deficit would be reduced immediately by 1/3. So who put in these changes for structural reforms in the last minute? Well, I don't know. Obviously, somebody in the negotiation team from the side of the United States. But this is actually a pattern. Trump attempts something positive, then a sabotage occurs, and the whole effort goes nowhere. And I think if the Trump voters and other concerned people really want to do something about that, they have to give President Trump the backing so that he can maybe get some better advisors than these people who lead him in the wrong direction every single time.
And we've seen this before, Helga, before previous summits when Trump was going to meet with Putin and Xi Jinping in Buenos Aires. His meeting was sabotaged by, I think at that time it was a Syrian intervention or something. You had a similar situation occur when he was supposed to meet with his previous trip to France to commemorate the end of World War I. So I think you see this British constant intervention, and we're going to continue to expose that because it's directly related to what is coming out now on the whole Russiagate story. That what we've said from the beginning is that the real issue of Russiagate was the strategic opposition of the leading forces of the British Empire to Trump establishing new relations with Russia and China. Now, Helga, there have been some developments since the last time we've spoken with the investigation of the investigators, a letter from Assistant U.S. Attorney General Stephen Boyd to Congressman Nadler about the importance of this investigation underway by Barr and Durham. How do you see this thing unfolding with the Russiagate story?
Well, I think it's very promising because this letter by Boyd to Nadler actually talks about that there is a very broad investigation involving the U.S. and foreign intelligence services. And, I think that is quite promising because I think the investigations under the leadership of Barr, I hope that they will really bring the whole story out. The question here is a question of time because the Mueller report took more than two years. And if the Barr investigation would be anywhere as slow or, take as much time, it may be too late because, the events are really very pressing. So I think that the old question of listening to Bill Binney, who is part of the Veterans for Sanity and Intelligence, a group which did the forensic investigation of why there could have been technically no Russian hacking. Now that story is coming out internationally. Mr. Binney was just on a Swedish radio show, and the question to ask Binney, who talked to Pompeo on the request of President Trump already a long time ago, that this be taken serious because there was no Russian hacking, and instead you had the collusion with another foreign power, namely British intelligence, and it's very, very urgent that that comes out. Now, the New York Times reported that already some CIA agents were investigated, and I think that there are all signs of extreme nervousness of this apparatus that their crimes could be unearthed. But I think a question of time and an educated electorate is really of the essence, so you should help our efforts to spread all of these things.
And we put out the original story on the British background of the whole Mueller investigation. So we've been way ahead of the curve, and people who have been looking at our website and reading our material know that. Now, Helga, just because we're running a little short on time, I want to switch to another subject which is quite fascinating, which is the rebellion of the U.S. labor movement against the Green New Deal. The Democrats seem to have nothing to offer except impeach Trump and destroy what's left of U.S. industry and manufacturing. And now you have labor unions in California saying the Green New Deal would be a disaster. There's a big push globally now for this whole green movement. And I guess in the United States, there's resistance to it, but this has to spread, doesn't it?
Well, I think it's very promising that the Californian trade unionists are now moving against it by making emphatically the point that this would destroy the job and livelihood of millions of people in practically every area which is affected. I think this is a global offensive, and unfortunately in Europe, at least in Germany, this is really a very serious thing because of a whole series of manipulations prior to the European Parliament election. First, you had this children crusade led by the poor Greta Thunberg, a poor child which is completely, or a teenager, I would say, who is completely manipulated by people like Kevin Anderson, who advocated already in 2000 that the carrying potential of the Earth will be only 500 million, because he says the climate will go up to 4 degrees or even 6 degrees. Then you had the Friday for Future mobilization and some absolute mainstream media manipulation of a so-called influencer video produced shortly before the election in Germany. So as a result of all of this, which has the typical earmarks of intelligence operations manipulating the public opinion in such a way that now the Greens are almost the leading party in the polls. They could become, if there would be now early election, which could happen in Germany because of the collapse of the CDU and the social democracy. If you had a Green chancellor, this would be the end of Germany as an industrial nation. And because of the power and size of the German economy, it would also mean the end of Europe. So I think, what is happening in Germany with this green climate protection craziness, which has reached proportions of absolute hysteria, where people don't discuss anything else anymore. This is as much a British coup against Germany as the Russiagate coup was against Trump. Now, we will put out some more documentation of that, but I think, if you think what the Morgenthau plan was supposed to do to Germany in the post-war period, this is a Morgenthau plan 5 times over and has to be reversed. Now, I think that there are more and more people waking up to that. There are now, even in Germany, coming out some industrialists and others who say the exit from the energy, going out of nuclear energy without having an alternative was a big mistake, and we have to have nuclear energy. And in the United States, there's also a very beautiful thing, which I think should be an inspiration to trade unionists all over the world. There is a letter by Roger Kelvin from the U.S. Plumbers Local 5 in Washington, which is really beautiful, where he basically demands, he says this British New Deal should be defeated. It's an effort to recolonialize the United States. And then he demands that all trade unionists should get a training in the context of NASA to be trained to set up a permanent station on the moon, to learn how to do mining on the moon, for example, helium-3, to learn how to use robots, and be trained after 2030 for interstellar operations, but basically train the whole workforce to deal with the next economic platform, as my husband would have called it, and learn the skills required for workers and trade unionists to work in space. in the context of Trump's space program, where he promised he would put man on the moon by 2024, I think this is fantastic, because you need this kind of in-depth mobilization of the population to back up what Trump is doing, especially because the Congress is dragging its feet in the financing of this absolutely necessary science driver program. So I think we are in an incredible period where people should become active. They should work with the Schiller Institute, because, you know, we have the concepts which are absolutely required to solve this present crisis.
And I think, Helga, just reflecting on what we've been discussing, it again brings up the point of the importance of this memorial event, which put a focus on your husband's intervention in every single one of these areas: strategic, scientific, cultural, how it is that we have to prepare ourselves for the future. And again, I think it would be very useful if you just summarize the importance of this event in terms of providing people with a direction forward.
Well, you know, it is a fact that most people are so much suffering under the burden of, you know, getting their livelihood together by, you know, just making ends meet, which is becoming more difficult for most people. And they don't have time to think about the future. They don't have time to think about a vision where humanity should be in 100 years from now. And, you know, that is why looking at the work of Lyndon LaRouche is so absolutely crucial, because, you know, he is the real America. If you want to have any person representing the best identity of America as a republic, it is Lynn. And he had a beautiful vision of what the new paradigm would be. He wrote a book, The Next 50 Years of Earth, or Earth Next 50 Years. And, you know, beyond that, he had the most incredible ideas about how the world would be different once you have fusion, thermonuclear fusion as a commercial energy source. You would have raw material security and energy security. Raw material security because you could separate all the waste into isotopes and put it together into new raw materials, including nuclear waste. So this problem would be solved as well. And then naturally international cooperation on the space research and space travel gives the kind of international cooperation which is absolutely needed. And let me say, you know, for me, the imaging of the black hole is the best example that international cooperation is an absolute must if civilization is supposed to survive. Because you could not have done that in one country, not even in Russia, which has 11 time zones, because it required to put radio telescopes in Spain, in Chile, in the Arctic, in the United States, and 4 more places to get the kind of wideness or width to make the imaging of this incredible new physical phenomena, which, you know, all physics breaks down, and it shows you that we have to make breakthroughs building on Einstein's theory of general relativity. But, you know, we are really at the verge of a new era, which requires all the creativity of all nations working together for the common aims of mankind. And there's no other American which stands for this beautiful conception of the future of humanity than my beloved husband. And therefore, I really ask you, you know, help us to exonerate him and help us to get the United States into this new paradigm, because that's what the whole world wishes for.
Well, Helga, thank you for your words of inspiration, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes, I hope so, next week.
Okay.